Okay, so our next speaker is Anna Longhini. She's the Global Scientific Affairs Senior Manager at Sony Biotechnology with over 20 years experience in flow cytometry across research, core facilities, and industry. She trained as an immunologist when she earned her PhD at the University of Campinas in Brazil, where she managed a flow cytometry lab at the Hematology Center. And then Anna began her career as a field application specialist, building a strong foundation in user training and cross-disciplinary applications. She later held leadership roles in academia and clinical research environments, including supporting high parameter flow cytometry for clinical trials at MD Anderson Cancer Center and serving as the scientific manager of the Memorial Sloan Kettering Center's flow cytometry core, where she collaborated closely with researchers on advanced high dimensional workflows. Her work focuses on spectral and high parameter flow cytometry, panel design, data quality, and education, and is also a member of the MetroFlow Steering Committee and leads educational initiatives across the cytometry community and is an excellent speaker. So I'm looking forward to another great session. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the warm welcome. It's always a huge pleasure to be here with the FlowTex. It's just so nice to see all my friends and colleagues from Texas. And it's one of my favorite Flow meetings. It's just what you guys do, 3 days of talks. It's insane, and it's always like a joy to be here. So I think the idea with this talk was continue this conversation about mixing single state controls, and I'm happy that we had so many questions because it seems that it is a subject that we know, we kind of have a feeling, like someone mentioned, oh, just use Alexa Fluor 700 with cells. We kind of, everybody, like we talk with each other and say, yeah, this fluorochrome is always a problem. So we kind of have a feeling, but I think this talk we can discuss like what happens when we don't follow what Matilda just described to us. And then we kind of start to spotting what's the easy way to recognize what happened with that mixing and what happened with that single stand control and how we fix that. So let's go together with this agenda. So we're going to break the rules and try to see some troubleshooting cases that can help us to distinguish these issues. And then we are going to discuss a little bit of or a lot, about how we use the beads and cells. So this has been like such a discussion and always a struggle for us because we cannot live without the beads, but they also can bring so many things. And then we are just going to go through this quick troubleshooting workflow that can facilitate our daily life. Okay, so let's start with the easiest one, right? This is also true for compensation, so it's not specific for mixing. And Matilda showed us this. We should just match, right, the fluorochrome. In the case of compensation, we kind of could like, okay, maybe I can do Alexa Fluor 647 with APC because they have similar peak. We'll be in the same channel. Maybe the spillover with the other ones will coincide mostly. But when we see like the spectral, let me see if I can get the pointer here. Okay, so when you see the spectrum for like excitation by different lasers, they are kind of similar, but when you overlap them, it's not like quite equal, right? So when we try to use different fluorochromes in spectral, we are not gonna be as lucky as in conventional. And here I'm showing just like how a mixing with Alexa Fluor 647 and with APC can make such an impact in the data that you are analyzing later. So in this situation, the full standard sample actually had the APC. And when we try to mix with the Alexa Fluor 647, we start seeing these banana shapes that Matilda just commented to us, that's over or under mixed as we call as well. And we should not be sad with this because a spectral can really detect the differences is the reason why we can use so many colors together, things that we could not do with conventional. So it's just natural, that we cannot replace one with another because we can really distinguish them, right? So this is a good thing. But then we have the tandins, and the tandins, they require extra attention, right? This was a flow posted by Memory Sloan during my time there, that we were replacing a tandem dye to mix a sample that was stained with CD3 on APC size 7. So instead of using the single stain control for APC size 7 in the same antibody, we use a different antibody with the same fluorochrome, so both are APC size 7. But when we normalize the data and we overlap them, we can see that they are not quite the same. And that's why we are seeing this issue here, right? When we are not using the same antibody. So for tandem dyes, we should not only use exactly the same fluorochrome, but also the same antibody, same lot, and I would say even the same vial, right? Because there is two different things. If you buy another lot, maybe there is a different chemistry for that tandem dye that you haven't seen before. And when you start using the same vial, the tandem dyes, they can change also over time. So if you prepare your single stain controls, why not use exactly the same that you use for your full stain sample? You could get rid maybe with APC, feed, CPE, but with tandem dyes, we really should use the same. There are more with tandem dyes, right? So I'm just so happy that you asked about the BV785 and the BV786, because it seems that's also a common fluorochrome that gives us problems, right? And I was so surprised, Matilda, with your data with the BV785 and the stability, because we are not so lucky with this one, right, Rui? This was an example for the Spectral workshop in 2025 at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. We were developing these panels with 23 colors focused on T-cell markers. And when we start analyzing this data, we gate on the live cells, and then we exclude monocytes, B cells, gating on CD3. So now we have the T cells, CD4, CD8 all looks so great until we start analyzing the CD44, that activation marker, and the exhaustion marker for BV41. Then we saw this very ugly data here that you should never analyze like this, right? What happened here? So we have our friend BV786, and this was really, I think, not half hour after preparation, right? And the first thing we want to do when you see an issue like this, when you're analyzing the data, you should not actually start analyzing your data before you checking the all by N plots, right? So this is the first place that you should look for mixing issues. You're gonna see all the fluorochromes against one of them. In this case, I'm showing here all of them by BV786. And when we look all these plots, we can easily spot that we have this crazy over mixing, if we can call like this, on BV421. So we see that there is a problem with this pair of fluorochromes here. Okay, so next step, we need to inspect the spectral reference, right? So how the spectral signature of our single stain controls are looking like. And when we highlight everything, it seems so beautiful and say, okay, I think there is no problems, but let's take a look on our couple there, right? The BV786 and BV421. So BV786 here is showing like some emission on the under the excitation of the violet laser on the far red, but there is a huge peak on the short wavelength for that fluorochrome that we should not expect, because the BV786 should emit close to 786, right? So when you highlight the BV421 and you take a closer look on these two fluorochromes, we can see that they completely overlap. And isolating them, we can see that actually the BV786 has more emission coming from the donor than actually from the acceptor, right? So congratulations, we just create a new fluorochrome. And this is a big problem, because if it is not the same fluorochrome that you have in your full stained sample, because on the full stained sample, the tandem dye was not degraded, then we have a problem, right? Because we are adding one fluorochrome on the mixing that doesn't match with my sample. And this is what we are doing here. So we have the BV41. When you overlap the three of them, we should be seeing this on our full stained. And we add into the algorithm this one. That's not the same fluorochrome. So for the single stain controls and in tandem dyes, especially these ones that we know that they give us so much problems, is also not just a matter of using the same vial. You should keep also the same conditions as your full standard sample. So same buffer, same treatment, same incubation time, same light exposure, everything to make sure that this tandem will not degrade in a way that the mixing will not work at all to fit your sample. So this is kind of a easy fix in a sense of replacement, right? You just will acquire another BV786, and then if it's the same one that you use for your sample and it's not degraded, then your analysis will be perfectly fine. So no need to rerun your full stained sample, right? Or actually lose your experiment. You just rerun the single stain control and you calculate the unmixing again. Okay, and then what happens if you break this rule as brighter or brighter? Matilda told us about, and it's so important. So the rule as brighter or brighter came from the conventional flow cytometry, right? In this case, we really need to have as brighter or brighter because the compensation assumes the linear relationship with the signal intensity. So this is another flow post-it from MSK that Kathy Daniels put together, where she shows here in purple, when you have a single stain control compensated, the compensation looks just fine. But when you acquire a full stained sample that the signal is brighter, this compensation will not work for that sample, right? We have this typical overcompensated sample here just because we didn't use a single stain control that was bright enough. And then there is an inaccurate spillover for the sample. But what happens with the spectrum and the mixing is that we need to feed the algorithm with the correct shape, right? And the part of the brightness, it really depends on the fluorochrome, the platform that you are using, because if you have a very bright signal or an intermediate signal, and they give you exactly the same shape, as we are showing here for this PE-DASL 594, and they correlate so well. Doesn't matter if you're gonna add on your algorithm one that was a spectral shape that was created with the brightest one or with the dimmer one, because we are gonna get the same result, right? But how bright or how dim can we go? Right? So this is another question. Like, I think we still feel that it's safer to say as brighter, brighter, because the risk of having one mixing issue is decreased with that. So here I kind of extrapolate a little bit, like getting very dim, very close to the negatives. And then when you have this type of gating that I did here, then this doesn't correlate that well anymore, the bright with the very dim. And then we start seeing these negative values here. And of course, and if you feed in the algorithm with this new spectral shape, it will not match the sample. And you can see that the mixing is going to be a little bit different if you use one spectral reference against the other one. So we want to avoid that. And I think the goal for the spectrum should be like we need a clear positive signal, right? We should avoid dim controls because you are risking to get a different shape. And we, of course, we need also to avoid saturation. For And this will vary on the platform that you're using because it depends on the detector, the linearity of these detectors. So we cannot make a simple rule for all the platforms, but I would say that to not risk, then brightness as your sample is will be the safest way. Okay, and then we have this rule, right? The autofluorescence of the positive control must match the negative control. This was true for compensation, is still true for spectral. So just to review a little bit, I know Matilda already explained this so well, but just to make like clear that what we are doing in spectral flow cytometry is that our single stained control can be cells or beads, will have the positive signal, can have the negative signal, but if you are getting just the positives, this positive signal will also contain the autofluorescence of this carrier. If it's cells or beads, they will all have autofluorescence, right? So when we are calculating the spectral signature for the single stain controls to feed the algorithm, what we want to do is have this pure emission of just the positive signal, and we want to discount, or we are subtracting the autofluorescence from this. So what we are doing is here on the single positive control, we are going to have the intensity for each detector, and then we have the unstained cell or unstained beads, depending on what we are using as your positive control, that will also contain some kind of fluorescence. And we want to subtract the signal for them to have what we call the net intensity in each detector for that specific fluorochrome. And then we will normalize this data, and this is what we are going to use to calculate the unmixing, right? So let's do this case study here, just to understand maybe a little bit better how this can impact our mixing and how this will impact our future analysis. So this is a simple panel where we are also getting T cells and B cells. And we get the cells and the singlets, and then we get the CD45 positives. So what's the problem here? I think we all can easily spot this banana shape that it seems that it's overcompensated, right? And I don't know if you can also spot another problem here with this sample. The people that are familiar with immunology, this is PBMC, and we are trying to get CD3s, and then after that, CD4, CD8. It's what? No T cells, right? So this is very low. It's not what we expected. So unless there is something wrong with this patient, we are expecting much more CD3s. Okay, so this is exactly what is the problem. It's not only this overall mixed, but also the missing of the CD3 positive cells. What happened in this case? When you look at the reference control that we use to mix this data, we can easily spot these negative values here, right? So in this case, what happened is that the person that was calculating the spectral reference, instead of selecting the unstained bits as the negative gate, select the unstained cells. So this is the unstained beads autofluorescence. You see that it's minimal, right? Almost nothing. And then the unstained cells, of course, we have some autofluorescence. And if we look like if I'm subtracting this value from my positives, this will cause these negative values. So that's why we really need to match the autofluorescence from the positive events with the negative events. Okay, so we had this incorrect percipy, right, with all the negatives. And also it's an easy fix, replacing them. Or in this case, which we don't even need to run again, right? We just need to select the right negative controls or adjust the gate. So this is another thing. Not always you need to reacquire your single stain control. Sometimes it's an easier fix. And then when you use the correct percipy, you not only fix this overall mixing, but you also find your T cells. I like this example because it shows that it's not just a matter, I don't like the way my data looks because it's tilted. I don't like that shape. It's also can really impact your data analysis, right? That we could not analyze T cells before, and now we can clearly see the population. So yeah, we need to match the autofluorescence. So why this is such a challenge? I think like it's very easy when we are using beads, but when we decide to use cells as single stand controls, and we are not talking about PBMCs, that's very easy. The cells, basically, they have all the same autofluorescence, so it's not a big deal. We can also very easily recognize lymphocytes, monocytes, and neutrophils or granulocytes, right? But when you're working with tissues, then it starts being a little bit more challenging, right? Like tissues that sometimes you cannot gate out the lymphocytes from a pool of cells, or with tissues like lung cells that you contain so many different types of myeloid cells that it's hard to gate them just in Ford side scatter. But what's the problem with that? The problem is that maybe some markers will be present on the myeloid cells, other markers will be present on the lymphocyte cells. And you really need to match, okay, if CD3 will be in lymphocyte, when I'm gating the positives for CD3, I needed to gate the lymphocytes for my negatives. But if my markers is expressed just, let's say, in neutrophils, and in my cells would be Ly6G, I need to gate the neutrophils on the unstained. And it's not always that easy to do that. So this is one of the issues. And the other one is what Matilda already mentioned, that when you have fluorescent proteins. This can be actually tricky, like Matilda said, because sometimes you have people come to the core that they don't have the MOC cells. They simply don't have non-expressing protein cells, right? And there's like some beads now, I think, that you can buy for some of the fluorescent proteins, but maybe not for all of them. And maybe they don't exactly match. So or they are not bright enough, right? So there is some situations that we can simply not use the cells, or we are going to use the cells and we are going to face some mixing issues anyway. And that's why we need to use beads. And then this conversation about beads and cells has been like for a while, maybe it's much earlier than 2021, but I just want to show this again. I don't know why I have a soft spot for all the MSK things. But Katy presented in 2021 this poster at Saito showing, and this was compensation, not even a mixing, right? Showing using cells or beads with our friend Alexa Fluor 700, and showing that actually this doesn't work that well with the beads, as now we mostly know. Later, just to bring this to 2025 or 2024, on OMIP 102, the authors also show that for some fluorochromes, like BV711 or BV805, the cells and beads, they don't actually match the spectrum. Okay, and so I think like now maybe everybody wanted like a guide of, okay, what are the fluorochromes that I have to use cells? What are the fluorochromes that I want to have beads? Because this thing of running all cells and all beads is costly. And it's a pain. And I think about all the PhD students having to bring the two sets of a single stand control. So why we don't have this consensus? Okay, these fluorochromes cells, these bits, right? But I think it's not an easy task to answer this question or to provide this guide. Maybe it has to be BD specific. Maybe it has to be platform specific, right? So all these things depend on the fluorochrome performance. It also matters, right? The component you buy your tandem die maybe is going to vary a little bit. The performance of your instrument, the configuration, and the diversity of beads. So maybe it's not a simple task to have one thing. But there is also this not matching, not predicting what exactly issue this will cause. If this is going to be a big issue or like a minimal issue will depend on the panel that you have, the combination of fluorochromes that you have. So it's not that easy. Otherwise, we have this answer already, right? Okay, so this is just to continue this discussion. This is an experiment that we run internally at Sony, and we had like 31 fluorochromes, and we run with 3 different beads. And as you can see, most of the fluorochromes, they perform the same between beads and cells. This is just calculating the R square or the cosine similarity. And if you keep a closer look here, you will notice that most of the problems are with the protein-based tandem dyes, right? The PEs, APCs, PCPs. They have more a higher mismatch, let's say like that. So it depends a little bit on the bead that you are using as well, but most of the problems we are facing, it happens here, right? And there is like, of course, some of them, like our friend Alexa for 700, that it actually is not that bad for other beads. So we also have this difference across the beads, and the beads are getting better. So this is another thing. Fluorochromes are getting better and beads are getting better. So maybe soon we will not have, we will need this discussion or this type of talk. So they vary, but they also tend to be consistent. This is the two different runs with 2 different PBMC cells on BUV805. So if you see in blue, like the spectral signature normalized doesn't change that much, even using different donors. And the beads mostly remain the same. So the difference on the spectral shape that we see in beads, they are also consistent, right? So it's not that we cannot simply not predict at all. We can kind of expect that we are going to see some differences and where the differences are going to happen. This one, I don't want to spend too much time, but it's just to bring to the attention that, okay, so I have this little mismatch here. How much of this will impact my data? We cannot predict. So this is calculating the secondary stain index. This is also like a flow post-it for the memory slow one. But the secondary stain index, I'm not going to go to the details here. There is a math behind. But it's basically saying, okay, how bad or how good is my compensation or mixing? If it's between -1 and 1, I would consider that this compensation or mixing is good. If it's over that or above that, then it's bad. So when you calculate all the matches that you can have between these 31 fluorochromes, it's more than 900 combinations, right? And if you look for all the beads comparing to with this higher than -1 and lower than -1 and higher than a +1, you see that for the worst bead, we have 40 secondary stain index that was higher or lower than that. So say, okay, of 900 combinations, not that bad, right? But we don't know because maybe it's a really bad one. And this really bad one, as we saw for the PerCP example, was really bad, right? We could not see the T cells. So it's hard to predict. And that's why we keep thinking like, okay, what should I use? Should I use cells or should I use beads? I think we're getting there. I think we're getting rid of bad fluorochromes as well, and this helps. But it really depends on your experiment, right? And I don't want to suggest one thing like, okay, just run all beads and then just replace the ones it doesn't work at all. As also some people recommend to just run the 2 of them. Like Matilda said, when you have a new panel, maybe you want to run all cells or beads and then you choose. But this is really up to every person what they think it's easier to do. But yeah, cells, we have these strains that is actually matching your full standard sample. So we probably will not have problems with that. But there are situations that we saw that when the autofluorescence is heterogeneous can be a little bit challenging. And then there's more variability, right, from run to run. In the practical notes, it's cheaper if you have enough cells, because this is another issue, right? If you're running PBMCs, you can do 40 single color controls with the cells you have enough. But when you're working with lymph nodes, or you're working with pediatric samples, when you are working with tissue, sometimes you don't have 30 tubes of single stain controls. It's simply impossible, right? And beads, on the other hand, it's very reproducible. It's very dim autofluorescence. The new beads, it's crazy how almost nothing autofluorescent they are, right? But they can behave in a different way compared to cells. And of course, it's more expensive. You need to buy extra things. But then once you have in your fridge, you have this availability, right? So it's really it's still a conversation that we continue having. Okay, so I finally just want to go through this quick troubleshooting workflow that can actually, I think, help on our daily work. So I think first thing we can say is just let's display the all by N plots from the full stained sample, right? It's easier to spot if we see any issue. And then if you have a presence of these mixing issues or the banana shapes in any way, the second thing you want to do is to check the single stain control spectral signatures, right? And then can happen two things here. They can be very different from what we were expecting. And then if this is the case as our BV786, or sometimes we swap fluorochromes and we don't notice, right? And then we are going to spot and say, okay, this is actually not a PE when I have a peak on my violet. And then there's no other thing to do unless you rerun your single stain controls and recalculate the unmixing. Of course, the spectral instruments, I think most of them, they have the library. So sometimes you can try to get a single stain control from the library and see if it fits your data. So not always you need to rerun, but it's something that we should consider when the fluorochrome is not as expected. And if it is as expected, then I see that can be, we can also split these in two different situations. One, you can verify the brightness just to see if this is impacting the spectral shape of that fluorochrome. And if you have enough events, right? Because as Matilda was saying, sometimes when you decrease the amount of events, then you are changing the MFIs. And for the spectrum, you are changing the MFI for every single detector. So this can really change the shape. And another thing, if this is the case, you can adjust the gates, right? For the positives, and then you recalculate the unmixing. But let's say that it's not a matter of brightness and event count. It's actually, you need to also check if the autofluorescence is matching between positives and negatives, as we said. And this is maybe also an easy fix. You have to adjust the gates or change the negative control for that spectral reference and then recalculate the unmixing. I think this is a little summary, but you know, like maybe you are gonna do all this recalculate the mixing and still see a problem, right? Because maybe it's a really mismatch. Maybe the single stain control is perfect, but your sample had a Tandy degradation. Then there is no save on that, right? So this is I think a workflow that you can go through and try to see where to spot the issues and then try to fix to save your experiment. So my take-home message here is just that accurate mixing depends on high-quality single-stain controls. And when in doubt, troubleshoot the controls, not the algorithm, right? I want to invite you all, the ones that are going to be at CITO this year, to come to our workshop. So we will have this interactive workshop that we are going to discuss these workflows for unmixing troubleshooting. We want to have something that it's agnostic, so it's not going to be for a specific platform. So I'll be there. Laura, that's giving a talk later from BD, will be there as well. We are going to have people from CRO, academic, and also SRL. So we will have this discussion to see if this workflow can be implemented in different scenarios. And I think I hope this discussion also brings us many ideas in how the manufacturers, they can implement maybe automatic workflows, maybe something that say, okay, here there is an issue here, right? Something that we cannot have to look for the data and do all this work just visually inspecting, but something more practical and also more accurate. And who knows, like I hope this will be like a very rich discussion. And with that, I want to thank you all for the attention, and also the SON team. I want to thank Koji, that's my partner in crime, and then Larry Wong, the FAS team and the R&D team in Japan. Some data of this talk they provided, and it's always very helpful. It's so hard to have a troubleshooting session without data, so I really appreciate. And also the MSK Flow Core, because most of the flow post-its are from them, and I always use them as good examples. And I'm open for questions. Thank you. Yeah?
Okay. There's 2 online questions. If you go back to your like APC size 7 slide from the very beginning,
Okay.
if you remember
Yeah?
that one. Okay.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like I don't know if slide 4.
Okay, what's the question?
Oh, yeah, I'll ask the question while you find it. Are those differences between APC size 7 CD3 versus CD16 coinciding with main autofluorescent peak detectors? Or is it difference in tandems or just different autofluorescence between T cells and NK cells?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's coming from the fluorochrome. Because I think like in this case that we use all the lymphocytes, and it's also expressing NK cells.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's like a matter of autofluorescence. It could be, but I don't think so. I think like this nuance of, yeah, there is a peak here that seems that is autofluorescence, but there's also here that is not like typical from autofluorescence for the violet laser. So I would say that maybe it's a combination of both. We cannot know for sure. I have to go back to the data and then really see if there is like any difference on the autofluorescence for these two samples.
Awesome. The other question has to do with nanoparticles. So this person is injecting nanoparticles into their mouse, I'm going to assume, either IV or IT, and they want to quantify the nanoparticles within their tumor. They are not sure what the proper control should be. They're having trouble because the cell line that they are using with the nanoparticle is much dimmer than what they're seeing in the tumor. So do you have any recommendations on a better control? The nanoparticle is
The
fluorescent.
nanoparticle is fluorescent. Okay. I think it's always a matter that what you're feeding your mixing, right? I don't know if I fully understand like the issue that they are having, but it seems that if you have the nanoparticle with your cells, let's say not the injected ones, right? Coming from the tumor. And you have negative cells for that nanoparticle. The spectral shape that you are gonna got from the positives, subtracting the autofluorescence of those cells, should be the real fluorescence of that nanoparticle. So it should not be different unless the nanoparticle changes in the tumor environment. The spectrum should be the same. So I would say that maybe are different issues there that can be related to autofluorescence of tumor samples. That's so challenging, more than for the nanoparticles per se, I would say. But yeah, I would love to see the data and help to troubleshoot, but it's hard to say, right?
Yeah. So, let me just add. Let me just add two things. First, from that example there, I do believe, if I remember well, that's the same sample, and then beads stained with APC Cy7CD3 and APC Cy7CD16. So that's the only thing changing there. So it should be just related to the differences in the tandem dyes,
I believe
if I remember
so.
well. And then related to the second question, I think, and I may be wrong, but I do remember in some of the cases where people were doing this, although they were not, we were not running spectral experiments. This was just conventional with just a few colors. I think the controls that they were bringing, they were actually being able to get cells that were really loaded with these nanoparticles, so that the control was bright, or at least as bright or brighter than the sample, if I remember well. So I don't know, maybe there are some, difficulties there in getting the right cells to load enough. But yeah, I guess the solution here would be to try to get a system cells that could engulf enough of these nanoparticles. And again, you just need, 500 events that are very bright.
Yeah, exactly.
And be lucky.
Yeah, good point.
Hi, good morning. Good morning. So, keeping in mind the practical issues of compensation, what would be your thought in correcting the autofluorescence with cells and then do the compensation with the beads?
So like Matilda said before, we can have both in the same experiment, right?
Right.
As long as you select the correct negative events. What you cannot do is have a universal negative that is cells, but you also have beads in your single-strand controls, and you're using the same universal. In this case, you still can have universal controls, but then you need two. One to use for the beads and one to use for the cells, right?
Yeah,
So
but the beads that I use has two peaks, one for the negative, one for the positive. That's what you mean?
yeah, so this is another thing that Matilda brought up, is that sometimes it's better to have a negative bead tube
I see.
instead of gating the internal negative.
I see.
Because it depends if you don't wash well or how the beads behave. Not all the beads are the same. That you still can have in this internal negative some type of staining. So
I see.
it's not your true autofluorescence. It's also a combination of the autofluorescence plus the fluorochrome.
I see. So in the unstained tube, you want me and to get on the population, which
Maybe this is an idea, right? You can gate like I usually do one tube for cells and one tube
for beads.
tube for beads. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry for my voice.
Okay,
Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to know about your experience with fluorescence -1, especially for larger spectral, and makes sense to do a fluorescence -1 with beads if you don't have cells enough to do it.
I never did that. I don't think we represent, because also fluorescence -1 you do as it's a control to gate, right, your cells. So the beads will not represent that. I would say that unless you want to troubleshoot your panel design and see what's going on, but I don't see a reason to do FMOs on beads, do you? Yeah.
Just kind of understanding which ones you need to take out to.
Instead of doing like if you have a 30 color panel, 30 FMOs like that, you don't need that. Or maybe you will combine some. So you do fluorescence -5, let's say like that. Then you can like try to decrease the number of FMOs. But yeah, beads I don't think will be helpful for this case. Okay, welcome.
Thank you. My question is, as a former assistant director of a flow core, the best thing about Spectral was how sensitive it is and how much more you can do. But the best thing about conventional was that it was a lot more forgiving and a workhorse and forgiving of real problems and errors. And you could still get good data with little differences, like using all beads as your controls was usually fine.
Yeah.
Without so much optimization. I'm wondering if there's a way with Spectral that we can try to make it more forgiving for certain panels. Like, do we have to use all of the signature information when we're calculating unmixing or compensation? Like in conventional, we don't use all the full spectrum, right? And so that makes it more forgiving.
Yeah.
Is there ever instances where we could simplify a spectral system to get the best of both worlds?
Yeah, I think like most of the platforms now, you can use virtual filters that you will not, like I don't need the full spectral for these 4 color panels, or they are very like feeds APC and another one on violet, another one on UV. You don't actually need them. So yeah, you absolutely can do it. Okay. Yeah. Any other question? You're welcome.